As a community, Boggsville doesn't even exist anymore, but it had a profound impact on the early settlement of Colorado.
You may think, oh, it's just 2 houses, it's not that much, but really so much has happened here.
Boggsville is a window into the past. It lets people see what was here, the importance of it to the Arkansas Valley.
Places like Boggsville are going to get set up and down the river here.
We had the Anglo-Saxon, the Spanish, and Indians all living right here at Boggsville.
Part of what makes Boggsville so important to Colorado, but I also believe so important to our nation, is that it does represent this early first-generation settlement. It represents the cultures that exist in the state today that were living together there.
That's part of Boggsville too, is a meeting of cultures, but also the passing of cultures.
This was the headquarters of a gigantic cattle industry and the headquarters of a massive sheep industry and a trading post that traded with American Indians on the Santa Fe Trail. It brought together some of the leading mercantile families of early Colorado into this one place. The property ownership of Romelda Luna and Amachi Prowers and Josefa Carson provides the land base for the fortunes that were made here.
This program was funded by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with support from the Denver Public Library and History Colorado, with additional funding and support from these fine organizations. And viewers like you, thank you.
When I sometimes volunteer at the museum in town and people come in, I always say, you gotta go out to Boggsville. And they say, what's Boggsville?
Boggsville is located in the southeastern corner of the state of Colorado. The Arkansas River is approximately 2 miles north of Boggsville, and the Purgatory River is approximately a half-mile east.
There were people living here thousands of years ago, if you think of the Native American populations, and then the Spanish people who were living in the area since the 1600s.
Everything this side of the Arkansas River was Mexico. Everything on the other side was U.S.
The Santa Fe Trail ran on the north side of the Arkansas River
and came right here through the property. I always call it the I-70 of, or I-25 of Colorado, because that's basically what they did. They ran trade goods from back east to Santa Fe and on down into Mexico. As predecessors to this place, you had Bent's Old Fort, Bent's New Fort.
A lot of the early forts in Colorado were not military forts, they were trading forts, and Bent's Fort was probably one of the best known of them, and it was established by the Bent brothers, William and Charles Bent.
Boggsville was the first Anglo non-fortified settlement in this area.
It could serve the military, it could serve the traders coming along the Santa Fe Trail, and most importantly, at least initially, it could serve the Cheyennes and Arapahoes who claimed southern Colorado as part of their homeland in the 1840s and 1850s.
When it was first started here, it was known as Boggs Ranch.
Many of the people that were here had been associated with Bent St. Vrain and Company. When that company dissolves, guys have to find another way to make a living.
The place was significant as a farm for many, many years.
Farming and ranching was the answer to that.
As it became more a village with lots and lots of people, it was no longer just a ranch, then it became a ville, or Boggsville, a village.
Built by relatives of the Bents, it became the trading hub of southeastern Colorado.
There was stores, county seat, blacksmith shops, stage stops, all kinds of enterprises.
For its size, Boggsville was an extremely economically influential community. It was the headquarters of a massive sheep operation and an even larger cattle operation. It was a hub of trade for Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians. It was a hub of trade for traders on the Santa Fe Trail. This community, Boggsville, was the heir to Bent's old fort of the 1840s.
Thomas Boggs, his story really begins in Missouri. He was the son of Lilburn Boggs, who was the governor of Missouri, and he was the great-grandson of Daniel Boone. His mother was Panthea Boone. From an early age, Thomas Boggs was very inquisitive and was very interested in the West, and early on went west and was able to become employed by his uncles at Bent's Fort. And as a result of that relationship, he found himself spending a lot of time in Taos, because of course they were trading back and forth between Bent's Fort and Taos and Santa Fe. And that's where, of course, he met Romelda Luna.
Romelda Luna Boggs was the daughter of a very prominent New Mexico trading family. She was related to the Jaramillos, who were all of that in New Mexico during the era of the fur trade and the Santa Fe Trail. She was from one of the most prominent trading families. You could accurately describe Romelda Boggs and her aunt, Josefa Carson, as the belles of Santa Fe. They were the beautiful daughters of the most powerful trading families in the most scintillating part of New Mexico. Romelda was the stepdaughter of Charles Bent, and Thomas Boggs was Charles Bent's nephew. Inevitably, he was going to meet Romelda Luna. And Romelda Luna was quite a catch. Her future was assured. So for Thomas Boggs, you could really argue that by marrying Romelda Luna, he married up.
They were married in 1846. And that was a significant year in the history of the Southwest, because that was the start of the Mexican-American War. So shortly after they were married, and of course at that time they're living together in Mexico, the Mexican-American War broke out, and Bent's Fort was involved with that. Thomas Boggs was involved with the war. The war, in fact, was really the focus.
In 1866, Colorado was a territory. We were still 10 years away from statehood. And people like Thomas Boggs exerted a lot of political and social authority in their communities. When Bent County was founded, Boggsville was made the first county seat, and Thomas Boggs was elected as the first county sheriff of Bent County. And that spoke everything to his commercial connections, to his social prominence in the community, to the social prominence of his wife, to be sure. These fur trading families who had come out of the fur trade of the 1830s and 40s and had settled down in Colorado in the 1850s and established ranches, were the first social elite of southern Colorado.
The reasons the Boggsville were established, it was a farming area and ranching. Thomas Oliver Boggs, I think the Shines called him White Horse. They knew him, but he became a sheep man, more or less.
Romelda Luna was not only socially prominent, but she was also wealthy, and she was wealthy both in money and in land. She was also connected to Charles Bent's partner, Saran St. Vrain, who awarded her part of his massive land grant, the Hill St. Vrain Grant, or the Los Animas Grant of southern Colorado.
She had family rights to be able to have a piece of the land grant, I think about 2,000 acres.
She owned the land where Thomas Boggs was going to make his great mercantile and sheep empire.
Spanish land grants, and they exist today in Colorado. They are still very much legally recognized rights, and there's many land grants that remain primarily in the San Luis Valley.
Thomas Boggs was one of the largest sheep ranchers in Colorado, along with the Baca family and the Vihils in southern Colorado.
To develop what he did here, he had to be pretty stern but giving.
That house became the hub for their mercantile and ranching empire. Thomas Boggs built a store to serve traffic on the Santa Fe Trail and to trade with Indians, and he began ranching sheep, and in time his sheep herd grew to more than 10,000 head of sheep.
I always referred to the wool business as a second fur trade because everything was made out of wool.
Thomas Boggs' sheep supplied wool for the mining communities of Denver and Central City. It supplied wool to Taos and Santa Fe, and it certainly supplied wool to St. Louis, where it was ultimately traded to the East Coast to be made into blankets.
And actually the sheep raising business didn't really disappear from this part of the country until about into the 1950s.
We like to think of Thomas Boggs as the first anything in the area. I mean, this was, in our view, the first permanent settlement along the Santa Fe Trail. So you had the end of the war in 1848, and then you had a lot of lack of certainty during this period. These were people who, up until then, spoke Spanish in combination with a lot of the native languages that were spoken. So now all of a sudden they're in an English-speaking world. And now all of a sudden their capital is not in Santa Fe anymore, it's in Washington, D.C. So it's such a changing and troubling time with a lot of uncertainty. So to establish a community there, I mean, that's why I think John Prowers decided to build his house in Boggsville, because that was the town.
John Wesley Prowers was sort of an archetype of the Western character. He was a man of his word. He was a very gentle man, but a firm man. He had sort of the will that you needed in order to create a massive cattle empire, but a man that everybody felt treated them fairly.
John Prowers had been born in Missouri in 1838.
Named after the founder of the Methodist Church, John Wesley, very strongly adhered to the beliefs and principles of the Methodist denomination.
As a young man, he came out into the Arkansas Valley as a clerk for the Indian agent, a man by the name of Robert Miller. This is about 1856, 1857. So it was at that point that John Prowers first learned of the Cheyenne.
He worked as a trader for a while as well. He worked for William Bent at Bent's Fort near what became Fort Lyon. And he learned to speak Cheyenne, he learned to speak Spanish. He was Bent's liaison on leading caravans to St. Louis and to Taos and Santa Fe.
Up until the time he died, I believe in 1884, his life would be intimately and intricately bound to the Cheyenne people.
He also had good connections with the native people, and in that regard met and then married Amache.
Amache Onichi, the daughter of a very prominent Cheyenne chief named Lone Bear, or as he was known to Anglos as One Eye.
She was raised in hunting and gathering society.
She met John at a very early age.
And they married in 1861.
She was young when they got married. She was younger than Prowers. Outlived him by over 20 years.
That was a pretty common practice, by the way, for traders among American Indians to fall in love with and to take Cheyenne or Arapaho wives. It cemented their trading relationship by creating a kinship relationship with their customers.
I don't know if she was forced into that or felt coerced in some way.
It's hard to say how consensual the relationship between John Prowers and Amache was.
Amache, the translated word means walking woman. And that was her Cheyenne name, one of her Cheyenne names.
He called his wife Amy, and he dressed her in American dress.
He took her back to Missouri and to meet his family, and they tried their best as they could to anglicize her.
John Prowers was very much trying to transplant his American upbringing to the frontier in Colorado.
Victorian style, is learning English, is married to a white man.
Never did, thank goodness, totally achieve it, which gave her her unique personality.
John and Amache Prowers moved to Boggsville in 1867, just a year after the founding of the community by Thomas and Romolda Boggs.
You know, to settle down in this kind of permanent residence, you know, with all these strange people that she hadn't grown up with, that weren't part of her culture.
She must have been an extraordinarily remarkable woman.
She was a very, very well-liked and admired person.
I wonder if she was under a lot of pressure to conform. Not only her, but these other women. But it would have been a lot harder for Amache because the Cheyenne world was completely different.
The people who knew her and remembered her powerful presence in Boggsville, that she was one of the leaders of the community.
She was still did ride a horse a lot and hunted.
The thing that's really remarkable about her and her photographs is the way that she blends Cheyenne custom and culture with Victorian American custom and culture.
I guess you'd see her riding her bicycle around, you know, around Boggsville. So you look out the window and see Amache dart by on a bike. And she'd go out and pick berries.
So you can even imagine what Christmases must have been like and other holidays at Boggsville when you had Romelda and her Spanish traditions and Catholic traditions, and the two gentlemen they were married to, both of whom came out of Missouri, and what their traditions were like, and then in combination with Amachi's Cheyenne traditions. It must have been the sights and the sounds and the smells and the cooking.
Her children remember how at Christmas time, her favorite Christmas treat to make was dried buffalo meat, sprinkled with cinnamon and sugar and rolled into loaves and then sliced like candy. And Amachi's daughter Mary Prowers claimed that the children preferred those little dried buffalo treats to the store-bought treats that John Prowers was able to provide them.
She didn't marry just any white man. You know, she married John Prowers.
In time, they formed a pretty formidable partnership. John Prowers certainly did everything he could to provide favors to Amachi's Cheyenne relatives. And together they raised several children. Prowers, because of his commercial connection to the Bent family, was a welcome member of that community. Like all the men of Boggsville, John Prowers was dependent on his wife and her land for his greatness. Amachi Prowers was the daughter of Lone Bear, and Lone Bear was one of the Cheyenne chiefs who was killed during the Sand Creek Massacre.
One of the events that took place in the aftermath of Sand Creek was an Indian treaty. And one of the articles of this treaty acknowledged 31 mixed blood and full-blooded wives of traders to receive land in the aftermath of Sand Creek. Each received, I believe, 640 acres of land. And that was because Lone Bear not only was killed at Sand Creek, Amachi's father, but he had lost 5 horses and a mule during the attack to the Colorado troops.
Like Thomas Boggs had done with Romelda Luna's land, used it as the base for his cattle operations. And John Wesley Prowers is remembered today as one of the great early cattle kings of Colorado. He built an immense cattle empire by taking advantage of his wife's land to create his ranch and his base, and then spreading his cattle all across the plains from Montana into New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle. Prowers ran tens of thousands of cattle on the open range and became one of the great cattle tycoons of early Colorado. Because Thomas Boggs was William Bent's nephew, they ultimately came together and formed an informal partnership. The two were allied commercially. They weren't strictly partners, but they worked to support each other's business interests.
The heyday of Boggsville was probably from 1868 to 1873.
A stopping place, resupplying place.
Being near the Arkansas River, and then, of course, the Purgatory River provided water for the settlement, but also allowed them to get a lot of the business that was coming along the Santa Fe Trail.
There was probably 20-some structures here at one time.
Boggsville's a busy, busy place.
Boggsville was so important. It was the Bent County seat.
It had the sheriff's office and the justice of the peace.
They had a blacksmith shop, they had the school.
There was a big barn, which was actually Huff's trading post.
Not far from that was a general store. There were ranch buildings and outbuildings to serve cattle and sheep.
They had all kinds of other enterprises going on here to back up and support the Boggs Ranch, as it was early called.
Well, like everything out here, it's a multicultural. Most of the men are Anglo folks, most of the ladies. I mean, quite frankly, there's not very many Anglo ladies out here, so it's a mixture of Spanish, Hispanic, Mexican ladies here. There's Amachi and Indian ladies here.
With various families living in around the area that help support the farming, the ranching.
The Prowers Household, which would have reminded you for all the world of a southern plantation with a wooded driveway to a whitewashed house with a wraparound veranda. Just beyond that was the Prowers Household with an open courtyard that faced to the east, and very often the teepee encampments of Amachi Prowers' Cheyenne relatives nearby.
The Allen family, the Ritz family.
There was quite a few children running around from all the families that lived here.
There was even a small house nearby that was the residence of Kit and Josefa Carson.
Kit Carson was, everybody knows, a famous frontiersman.
Kit Carson was such a significant person in our history because of the role he played in developing the West.
An incredible career as a trapper and a mountain man and a guide and a military commander.
Kit Carson is so famous, and he's probably the most known frontiersman.
Kit was in and out this country all the time, coming up and down the Santa Fe Trail.
His relationship with the Native Americans, his relationship with the New Mexican community, his relationship to Bent's Fort.
Thomas Boggs and Kit Carson had been friends for as long as they had been in the West together. They had a very close friendship. And at the end of Kit Carson's life, he was looking for a place to settle down.
He gets over here late December of '67, early January '68.
Kit and his wife Josefa moved to Boggsville.
Kit Carson would have been 58 when he moved over here.
Like the Boggs family, like the Prowers family, the land that Kit Carson occupied was owned by his wife, Josefa Carson.
As a niece of Cornelia Vigil, Josefa had claim to part of this land, 2,040 acres.
Another Jaramillo who had very strong connections to the trading families of Taos and Santa Fe.
Boggsville sits on what was the Vigil St. Vrain land grant, or Los Animas land grant, and Kit had purchased 2 parcels of land.
Josefa Carson was a beauty in her own right as well, and again, Kit Carson really married above himself to marry a woman like Josefa Jaramillo.
His wife was given birth to their 7th child.
Kit Carson encountered tragedy. His wife died in childbirth.
The loss of her, and combined with his war wounds and hard lifestyle, really caused him. I think he was already ill at the time, and I think the loss of her was just more than he could bear.
The day before Kit died, the kids, of course, were over here at Boggsville, and Kit asked the folks at Fort Lyon to bring the 2 of the boys, Kit II and Charles, my grandpa, over to see him. And they went and visited and so forth, and Kit sent over to the settler shop. They bought straw hats, and as the kids were coming back across the river, my grandpa's hat flew down the river and floated away. May 14th, they took Kit over to Fort Lyon. They put a little pallet in the corner. The next day, they came over and told him his dad wasn't here anymore. They buried them, both of them, in the garden. So those 6 younger kids were raised in this house. People out here, you help each other out, you take care of each other.
Without the women, this place would have never existed.
These were women who were from very prominent families. And Amachi, her father, was a chief of his tribe. So these were women who were born in leadership positions and very prominent in their cultures and their civilizations.
The property ownership of Romelda Luna and Amachi Prowers and Josefa Carson provides the land base for the fortunes that were made here.
This story, this place, shows and demonstrates the important role of women. They decided to make Boggsville the county seat. And I think that was because of the presence of women. You know, women were always a civilizing presence on the frontier.
Boggsville only lasted approximately 10 years.
As railroads often did, they picked the winners and the losers in some of these earlier settlements, and they established the present-day town of Los Animas.
Taking away the commerce of the Santa Fe Trail.
When that happened, the county seat that was out here in Boggsville was moved to Los Animas, and everything moved to Los Animas.
And Boggsville slowly declined.
Congress had to approve up all these land grants that the Mexican and Spanish governments had given out. Tom Boggs, his claim doesn't get approved. That's when he's going to move off. And Vigil St. Vrain land grant, the Los Animas land grant, they didn't allow most of it.
And that pretty much was the end of Boggsville.
Old adobe buildings, you know, somebody's got to be here to take care of them.
Boggsville has approximately 109 acres of land. Visitors, when they come initially, they see 2 houses. One is the Boggs house and the other one is the Prowers house.
If the walls could talk, if those trees out there could talk, they'd have some great stories, I imagine.
It's constantly maintenance to keep the adobe from cracking.
Somebody's got to take care of it as best they can.
Benton County Historical Society, they felt a need to restore this area out here, so they purchased the land. Property of Boggsville, the house and stuff, is now just recently got on the National Treasure for historical sites.
The culture and the diversity and what happened here with the history and all of the people, it's just, I just find it fascinating.
Boggsville to me represents the unknown, the unanswered, love, hate, all the things that make us human beings. Just a small little, area, nutshell of humanity.
Part of what makes Boggsville so important to Colorado, but I also believe so important to our nation, is that it does represent this early first-generation settlement. It represents the cultures that exist in the state today that were living together there.
Colorado in the 1860s was not always a place of inclusion. It was just as often, maybe more often, a place of exclusion of Hispanos, of American Indians. But at Boggsville, the Boggs family, the Prowers family, the Carson family made inclusion work for them. And the buildings they left behind represent the kind of community that they aspired for.
It's so much about America today, and so it was part of our fiber all along, and I think it's just something that's the story we need to continue to tell people, because we've always lived in a multicultural place. And in today's world, and with some of the things that have been going on in some of our cities and our communities, I think it's so important to remind ourselves that we are a multicultural country, and we always have been, and we always will be.